All right, so you know how we love to dig into these kind of unusual real estate markets.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And today we're looking at Bangkok's Old Town.
Interesting.
Yeah. And we've got this blog post from, exploring this idea of whether or not
Mhm.
it could be a smart move for people to actually, you know, invest in property there.
Especially for overseas investors, it seems.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
particularly if you're, not based in Thailand.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to kind of pull out the most important things for you guys listening to think about.
Right.
If you're, intrigued by this whole idea of Bangkok's Old Town as a place to maybe put some money into real estate.
Gotcha.
We'll be looking at everything from, the obvious stuff like the cultural heritage
Right.
to how Bangkok's just massive tourism industry plays into this.
Huge.
And we'll try to get a sense of, affordability too.
Mm-hmm.
How does it stack up against those, major global cities that everyone always talks about?
London, New York, Tokyo, that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I'm really curious about that, actually.
me too.
Because you always hear these stories of, places where you can get so much more for your money.
Right. Is Bangkok one of those places? We'll find out.
Let's dive in.
Okay, so right off the bat, this blog post frames Old Town as not just a district,
Great.
but like the historical core of Bangkok.
Right, at the heart of it.
All those stunning temples we see in pictures,
Oh, yeah.
the grand palaces.
Yeah, the markets, too.
The market's exactly bustling with life.
So it's not just like a museum piece.
No, it's a living, breathing part of the city.
That's cool.
But they suggest that investing here is almost like owning a piece of Bangkok's soul.
Wow. That's a powerful way to put it.
Right. So from an investment angle, what parts of this cultural richness do you see as really key?
Well, I think the most obvious thing is it attracts both tourists and locals.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Tourists looking for that authentic experience and locals who just love the vibe.
Right. So that's built-in demand for properties.
Right.
Whether it's, people living there or visiting.
Exactly.
Here's something else the blog post brings up.
What's that?
The potential for investments to actually help with conservation efforts.
Oh, interesting.
Properties that are restored carefully to keep their historical look
That's
could become even more desirable and valuable.
because they embody that heritage.
Yeah, right. So it's not just about making money, it's about preserving something special.
Yeah, I like that angle.
Now let's talk about the bigger economic picture for a second.
Right.
This blog post really emphasizes Bangkok's stability as a business hub in Southeast Asia.
It's a major player for sure.
Yeah, and they suggest this creates a good foundation for the property market.
That makes sense.
So can you break that down a bit? Like, how does economic stability usually impact real estate investments?
Well, generally, a stable economy means a more predictable property market.
Okay.
Businesses are doing well. People feel more secure financially.
Mm-hmm.
And they're more likely to make those big long-term investments.
Like buying property.
Exactly. And the blog post also mentions all these infrastructure projects and government initiatives
Right.
to boost the economy even further.
So that all ties into property values.
Yeah, improvements in accessibility, new opportunities.
It makes the area more attractive overall.
Right.
Now, we can't talk about Bangkok without talking about tourism.
It's huge.
Massive. And this blog post lays out some pretty striking numbers.
Let's hear them.
Okay, so in 2022, they had 11.15 million tourist arrivals.
Wow.
But then that jumped to 28.2 million in 2023.
That's more than double.
More than double, and they're projecting over 35 million for 2024.
That's insane.
So for someone thinking about investing in Old Town, how do these numbers translate into actual opportunities?
Well, for one thing, it means a huge demand for accommodation, hotels, guest houses, short-term rentals, all that.
And the blog post points out that people are going to Old Town specifically for the culture.
Right.
The historical sites, the authentic Thai experiences.
So they need places to stay.
Exactly.
There's always a need for more options.
So it's not just the sheer number of tourists, but why they're coming that matters.
Exactly.
And that feeds into this growing demand for properties in the area.
For sure.
But beyond the tourism, what other things are driving this interest in owning property in Old Town?
Well, Bangkok's population is growing.
Right. Yeah.
And more people want to live in the center.
Makes sense.
And Old Town is central. It's well connected.
Yeah.
Plus, you've got this influx of expats.
Oh, yeah. Those looking for a more authentic Thai experience.
Right. And they're drawn to places like Old Town.
So all of this is creating a really strong rental market, especially for short-term rentals.
Right.
The blog post mentions smaller condos and renovated traditional houses as being particularly popular.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I guess smaller condos are probably more affordable for investors,
And they're easier to rent out.
whether it's to tourists or expats.
Makes sense?
And those renovated traditional
Oh,
houses,
yeah. Those tap into that desire for authenticity,
they've got that unique charm.
right? Somebody you wouldn't find in a modern apartment.
So let's talk money now, affordability.
Okay.
The blog post says that Bangkok property isn't exactly cheap,
Right.
but it is relatively affordable compared to places like London or New York.
Okay. That's good to know.
But of course, location is everything.
Right.
Riverfront properties and those close to major attractions, those are going to be pricier.
Yeah, that's always the case.
But they point to these emerging neighborhoods.
Emerging neighborhoods.
Yeah, these smaller swa with local markets and more of an authentic vibe.
Oh, interesting.
So those could be more budget-friendly options.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So these swa, they're basically the smaller side streets branching off the main roads.
I see.
And they haven't been completely gentrified yet.
So they still have that local character
Exactly.
and potential for growth.
Right, because the blog post mentions new transport links and planned developments in these areas,
So they could become much more desirable in the future.
which could mean a good return on investment. Speaking of long-term growth, the blog post also talks about the potential for capital appreciation,
Okay.
and they highlight how resilient Bangkok's property market has been.
That's reassuring.
But they also remind us to factor in those ongoing costs, like taxes and maintenance.
Always good to keep in mind.
Absolutely. So what do you think about the long-term prospects for Old Town specifically?
Well, it's a historic area, so there are some limits on large-scale development.
Right.
But on the other hand, the ongoing improvements across Bangkok as a whole.
Yeah, all that infrastructure.
Exactly. That's going to benefit Old Town, too.
Making it even more accessible and desirable.
Yeah, even areas that might be a bit further out from the tourist hotspots.
They'll become more attractive over time.
Right.
But yeah, as the blog post says, being realistic about costs is key.
You got to factor in everything.
Now let's get into the whole issue of foreign ownership regulations.
Oh, yeah, that could be tricky.
The blog post explains this 49% rule for condos.
Ah, the 49% rule.
So foreigners can only own up to 49% of the total floor area in a condo building.
Okay.
And they stress that you have to check if a building has already hit that limit.
Right, because if it has, then foreign ownership is a no-go.
Exactly. And they bring up leasehold agreements as an alternative.
Oh, yeah, where you lease the land for a set period.
Up to 30 years in Thailand with options to renew.
So you don't own the land outright, but you have the right to use it.
Yeah. So for a foreign investor looking at Old Town, what are the most important things they need to understand about these regulations?
Well, first off, they really need to grasp that 49% rule.
Yeah.
It's a cornerstone of Thai property law for foreigners.
And if a building's already at that limit, they have to consider leasehold agreements.
Right.
Which can be good, but you absolutely have to understand the terms.
The terms of the lease and the renewal process.
Yeah, getting professional advice on that is probably essential.
I would say so.
Okay, so all this leads into the legal side of things.
Due diligence time.
The blog post really hammers home the importance of due diligence.
It's crucial.
Verifying title deeds, seeking legal counsel, all that.
You can't skip those steps.
And they also say you should check local zoning laws
Oh, right.
to make sure you can actually use the property for what you intend.
Whether it's residential, commercial, whatever.
So what would you say are the key takeaways for our listeners here regarding these legal aspects?
Okay, so the main takeaway is don't underestimate the importance of due diligence.
Yeah.
You've got to make sure the title deed is legitimate,
Mm.
so you don't run into any ownership disputes later on,
And zoning laws are crucial too.
right? You don't want to buy a property only to find out you can't legally use it how you planned.
Exactly. So a lawyer specializing in Thai property law,
That's a must-have.
they can guide you through the whole process, make sure everything's done right.
And protect your interests,
Yeah, that peace of mind is priceless.
for sure.
Let's loop back to tourism for a minute.
Okay?
We've talked about the numbers, but the blog post also dives into how tourism directly impacts property values and rental yields. And they mention all the investment going into the hospitality sector itself.
New hotels, guest houses, upgrades.
Yeah. So how would you describe this relationship between tourism and real estate in Old Town?
Well, I think it's a pretty symbiotic one.
Symbiotic.
Yeah, I mean, more tourists mean more demand for places to stay,
Right.
which can lead to higher occupancy rates and better rental yields.
For property owners.
And all that investment in hospitality just makes Old Town even more appealing to tourists.
It's a positive feedback loop.
And as the tourism infrastructure improves,
Yeah.
it often benefits the surrounding properties too.
making them more desirable.
Exactly.
The blog post also goes into short-term rentals specifically.
Airbnb and the like.
Yeah, they acknowledge the potential for good returns, but also the challenges.
Competition regulations, management, all that.
So what should someone realistically expect if they're considering this route in Old Town?
Well, first off, it's not passive income.
Right, you're going to be busy.
You've got tenant turnover, cleaning, maintenance, guest communication.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And the competition is fierce.
So your property needs to stand out.
And you got to stay on top of local regulations because they can change.
So good property management is essential.
Whether you do it yourself or hire someone.
Okay, let's shift gears to infrastructure.
Okay.
The blog post talks about all these projects happening in Bangkok.
The MRT, BTS expansion, the high-speed rail.
All of that is reshaping the city and making it more connected.
And easier to get around.
Yeah. So how important are these infrastructure improvements for Old Town specifically?
Well, even though Old Town is already central, better connectivity just makes it that much more accessible.
For tourists and residents.
Yeah, and it opens up new areas for development.
Right. So all of that can have a ripple effect on property values.
Absolutely.
Now, the blog post breaks down the specific investment opportunities in Old Town.
Okay, let's hear it.
So you've got residential properties.
Okay.
From renovated traditional houses to modern condos.
Right, catering to different tastes.
Then there's the commercial side.
Shops, restaurants, all that.
A lot of that's geared towards tourists.
Makes sense.
But they emphasize those boutique and authentic businesses.
Yeah, those that really fit the area's vibe.
And then there's the possibility of investing in or restoring cultural heritage sites.
That's pretty unique.
Yeah, it's a way to potentially make money while also preserving history.
I like that.
But of course, each of these paths has its own challenges and considerations.
You do research.
The blog post then moves on to market trends and insights.
Okay, what's the outlook?
They describe the current growth rate as steady rather than super fast.
Steady growth.
Okay. And they say it's driven by Thailand's overall economy, urbanization, and foreign interest.
Makes sense.
They advise diversifying your investment strategy.
Good advice.
And they really emphasize the need for research and expert advice.
Especially for foreign investors.
Absolutely. They also offer some future projections.
Like what?
They expect continued growth thanks to all those infrastructure projects.
That makes sense.
But they also caution about potential global economic issues or government policy changes.
Yeah, you always have to keep those external factors in mind.
Now, the blog post also compares Old Town to some other popular investment areas in Bangkok.
Like where?
Places like Sukhumvit Siloam and Sathorn and Ekamai and Thonglor.
I've heard of those.
So why do you think they include these comparisons?
Well, I think it's to give potential investors a wider perspective.
Right, so they can see where Old Town fits into the bigger picture.
Exactly, because Sukhumvit is known for its expat community and good rental potential. Siloam and Sathorn are the financial hubs.
So attracting more professionals.
Yeah, and then you have Ekamai and Thonglor, which are those trendy up-and-coming areas.
Popular with younger crowds.
So this shows that different areas have different strengths and weaknesses.
And appeal to different investors.
Exactly.
Now let's talk about rental yields.
Okay.
The blog post defines it and gives a general average for Bangkok of 4-5%.
4-5%.
Okay. But they also list factors that can influence those yields.
Like location and property type.
Right. They say condos often have higher yields.
And they compare short-term versus long-term rentals.
So what are some things to keep in mind about rental yields in Old Town specifically?
Well, I think the key thing to remember is that 4 or 5% is just an average.
Right.
In Old Town, with its unique properties and different tenant mix, the average yield might be a bit lower.
Yeah, the blog post mentions 3-5% later on.
And as we've discussed, short-term rentals could have higher potential.
Because of the tourism?
But they come with more work and risk.
Long-term rentals are more stable, but maybe lower returns.
So it really depends on your individual strategy and risk tolerance.
And thorough research is essential.
Absolutely.
Okay, so wrapping up, the blog post addresses the risks and challenges of investing in any property market.
Market volatility regulations, economic factors, all that.
Yeah, but they also offer a long-term outlook for Bangkok's real estate market.
So they're optimistic overall.
Yeah, they project continued growth, and they highlight the market's resilience.
Which is good to hear.
So based on everything we've discussed today, and taking into account that this information is from Ocean Worldwide, a luxury real estate agency based in Phuket since 2004, with director Sander O'Neill having helped thousands over the years and focusing on high-end residential real estate in Phuket and Koh Samui. What are your final thoughts on the investment potential of Bangkok's Old Town for a foreign buyer?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag.
Mixed bag.
Yeah. There's a lot to like the charm, the history,
Yeah.
the relative affordability,
Tourism potential,
but they're all challenges.
the market fluctuations, the regulations.
The complexities of Thai property law.
So due diligence is absolutely crucial.
It's not a market for passive investors or those who are really risk-averse.
But for someone who appreciates Old Town's unique character and is willing to do their homework.
It could be a very interesting opportunity.
So it seems like it really comes down to individual goals and risk tolerance.
Yeah, and careful research.
Well, thank you for that thorough deep dive into Bangkok's Old Town.
My pleasure.
We've covered so much, from the cultural significance to the impact of tourism.
And everything in between.
What I find really fascinating is this idea of balancing preservation with development.
Yeah, how do you encourage investment without losing what makes Old Town special?
Exactly. And on that note, here's a final thought for our listeners.
Okay.
Considering how history and development are intertwined in Bangkok's Old Town, what kind of long-term impact do you think preserving its cultural heritage will have on its economic value?
That's a good question.
It's something to ponder as you explore this unique corner of the real estate world.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us, and be sure to tune in for our next deep dive.
See you, Beth.
Bye.